Good morning. We are continuing with Chapter 10, the Sod Busters. Let's review our key terms. Our first one is subsistence farming. What is subsistence farming? Who can tell me? Garrison.
You're farming enough food just for your family. You don't have enough to sell it, and you don't have enough to sell it. So you just get enough for your family.
Exactly. Subsistence farming is being able to grow enough food just for your family, not enough to sell and make a profit from it. Who can tell me about the Homestead Act? Edward.
It's a law that they would provide 160 acres, and if you live on it for 5 years, you would get food.
So it's that 1862 law. Remember, 1862 is when the U.S. Dakota War ended. So now we have all of that land, and they wanted to bring in more settlers. So the Homestead Act is that law that said, hey, we have up to 160 acres. You can have it as long as you farm it for 5 years. So it was a way to entice people to bring them into our state. Land speculator, Chase.
It's someone who buys and sells land at a great risk to make a profit.
Yeah, somebody who's buying and selling land to make a profit, but it's at a great risk because they might buy the land and think they're going to sell it for more, and all of a sudden nobody wants it, so they have to sell it for less. So it's at a great financial risk for them. Tell me about the market, Sam.
Somewhere where people can buy and sell foods and goods.
Yep. So the market is the place where you can buy and sell goods and services. It also sets the price. That's where prices are determined. If a lot of people want something and there's not much of it, the price is going to be higher. If you're at the market and you have a whole lot of corn and nobody's really caring for the corn right now, the price is going to go down. So the market is what sets the price. Tell me about diversified farming, Paul.
Process of farming a bunch of goods or things where there's a bunch of animals and a bunch of food, not just one thing. It's not like subsistence farming where
Diversified farming is not like subsistence farming. Diversified farming means you have a bigger amount, and it's also diverse crops, diverse livestock. So it's not just one. There's multiple types of food you're growing, multiple types of animals that you have. Tell me about the Grange, Colin.
it's a nationwide organization for farmers that supports their economic well-being.
So it's that nationwide organization. They support the farmers and they work with the politicians. So they're looking out for their political interests to do stuff like the Homestead Act. So the Grange is the group that's looking out for the farmers, making sure the farmers are taken care of. Tell me about the cooperative. Paul.
It's an organization that helps farmers sell their stuff at a good price.
Yeah, it's the farmers coming together and working cooperatively together so that way they can get better prices. They can buy in bulk. They can sell their things together to get a better price for it. And our last one that's underneath the box here is regulate. Molly?
To change or adjust something in order to change how it works.
Yeah, adjusting and changing something in order to change how it works. It's controlling how things are going to work. So we'll see what kind of regulations we get for farming. So we left off yesterday on page 199. Let's look at that blue box first. This is going to talk about the Homestead Act and the land speculators. So land, how to get it. European American settlers who needed land had several ways of getting it. The Homestead Act of 1862 provided one important way. This was a federal law that had a huge impact on many states, including Minnesota. A homestead was a section of public land up to 160 acres. After citizens had lived on a homestead for 5 years, built a house, and cultivated its soil, then the government sold them the property for an incredibly low price. So it wasn't free, but it was super cheap. Remember, breaking up that sod was not easy. So the Tainter family had 80 acres. They could get up to 160 acres but they have to break up all of that soil and make it ready to farm. So that's a big job. Colin?
So the government is selling it cheap because it hasn't been cultivated yet?
They're selling it to people who have cultivated it. They're selling it super cheap because that's their way to bring more people into these states. So they're saying if you go to Minnesota and you live on this land, that it's public land that we're going to say is your parcel to live on, you build a house, you cultivate it, and start the farming. So cultivating is doing that sod busting, breaking up the ground and putting in the crops. So if you do all of that for 5 years, then we're going to sell it to you super cheap. And so that way you can afford the land. So it's giving you that place to live for 5 years. And then you have the opportunity of buying it at a very low price so you can stay there forever. To be recorded as the official owner, they had to pay a registration fee of just $18. 160 acres. $18. Wow. The Homestead Act was not the only way settlers got land. Some bought it from railroad companies who had received it from the federal government. Others settled on government-owned land without permission and eventually bought it from the government. But they run the risk of getting kicked off the land. So if you're squatting on land that you don't have permission to be on, you could be evicted from that land and then you have nothing. So they were running a great risk. Still more took advantage of the government programs that offered free land to soldiers. So even today, veterans have many benefits. So they were giving benefits to the soldiers that fought in the Civil War, the soldiers that fought in the U.S. Dakota War. Not everyone who obtained land in these ways actually intended to live on it or farm it. Many people wanted the land only so they could sell it to somebody else and make a profit. These people were called land speculators, and they often made a great deal of money by guessing which pieces of land settlers would want to buy. So if the government has public land that they're giving in the Homestead Act, there's only so much land, right? So only so much of it is that public land. Some of the land maybe the railroad owned. So a land speculator might come in and say, ooh, this land has a lake on it, so it's got free water. It has the flat area, so you don't have to cut down trees. I think people are going to be really interested in this land. So I'm going to buy this from the railroad, and then I'm going to sell it to somebody at a profit because they're going to say, hey, I like what this spot of land has to offer. Consider the case of Louis Fertile, a land speculator in Lincoln County. Records show that Fertile once paid the government $8 for 160 acres. 10 days later, he sold those same 160 acres for $1,200. Is that a big profit? Yeah. It's a big profit in today's world. We're saying $1,192 is a lot of money. Think back 160 years ago. That was an enormous amount of money. Not all speculators were as lucky as Louis Fertile, though. Many lost their life savings by guessing wrong about how much money they could make on a land sale. Some people are saying, ooh, Louis just made a whole bunch of money. I'm going to go do the same thing. But their land wasn't as valuable. Nobody wanted to pay for their land, so they lost money. So that's where that risk comes in. All right, changes on the farm. The experiences of the teachers were similar to those of other early settlers in Minnesota. In addition to land, farm families also needed a house, a barn, fences, tools, animals, seed, and many more things. All of these cost money. Even with inexpensive land, farmers often had to borrow money to get started. They needed plows, axes, spades, pitchforks, pots and pans, stoves, needles, thread, and all sorts of other tools and household goods. Without these things, farm families could not start work. So we know they have to break up all that sod, 160 acres. Well, you're not going to do it with your hands, right? You're not going to dig in the ground. You need the tools to break it up. So you have to be able to buy those tools to break it up. Most farmers also owned a team of oxen. Oxen were slower than horses, but they could pull heavier loads and machinery like plows. Many families also had a cow or two and a few chickens or pigs. So they were diverse with their livestock. Minnesota's early settlers often started out as subsistence farmers. Most, like the Dainters, ultimately wanted to expand their farm beyond just feeding their families. As soon as they were established, they worked hard to better themselves by growing cash crops, crops to sell to earn income. They needed a cash crop with a reliable economic market. So you're not going to want to plant a whole lot of asparagus that you can't, not as many people want to buy. You might want to plant the wheat because people need that for their flour, to make bread. So wheat would be a high economic market value, whereas something else might be very low. So their cash crop is going to be something that's going to turn a big profit for them. During the 1860s and 1870s, this often meant planting wheat as a cash crop. Wheat was a relatively easy crop to cultivate, and prices were good because demand for wheat flour was growing. For a while, many Minnesota farmers depended almost entirely on wheat, but that turned out to be a big mistake. So let's look at the green box, income on the farm. Subsistence farmers produced only enough to feed themselves. Nearly all wished to produce more. When farmers were able to produce more than they consumed, they could sell their excess in order to increase their income. This income could be used to buy things for the family, improve the farm, or it could be saved for a later date. In order to increase their income, farm families worked to improve their human capital. Remember, human capital, that's from quite a few chapters ago. Who remembers what human capital is? Peyton?
Improving your skills and
So what's going to happen? You get better skills.
You get better income.
Yeah, you get better income. You're worth more. So they're wanting to improve their farming skills so they can make more money. So remember, human capital is the knowledge and skills that enhance a person's ability to earn income. The better we become at farming, the better crops will grow. The more we have to sell, the more money we make. Colin?
I'm gonna have a feeling that it's gonna run out of the market and nobody's gonna want to buy it.
That is one thought, because we know that wheat is going to be a big mistake if you only focused on wheat. Maybe they overflood the market with wheat. What do you think, Naveen?
If everyone is farming their own wheat, there's no need to sell it.
If everybody's farming their own wheat, there's no need to sell it. But does everybody live on a farm? No, because we have the towns. And there's the townspeople, and maybe they run the market, maybe they run the general store, or they're the sheriff, or they have one of the many jobs in town. They might not be growing enough wheat. Molly?
What if there aren't enough of the other crops?
Oh, maybe there's not enough other crops. Andrea?
Maybe when you're maybe something happens to all the wheat,
Oh, maybe there's a disease,
yeah,
like a blight on that crop, and the wheat all of a sudden gets killed off because the grasshoppers maybe come and eat all of the wheat. Is that what you were gonna say, Garrison? Or a disease affects it.
The wheat causes a disease.
I don't know if wheat would cause a disease, but something might cause the wheat to die off. Wheat, you don't typically like salmonella. Sometimes you'll hear about recalls on the lettuce because of salmonella poisoning. That typically doesn't happen with wheat. That's more of the veggies.
What's that?
It's a bacteria that makes you sick. And you don't want to eat any of the vegetables that are tainted with it because it can make you sick. So every once in a while you'll hear about that. We got a little bit more to read. A new way to farm. Planting the same crop year after year demanded too much of the soil, using up the nutrients that helped produce good crops. Also, farmers depended on just one crop had a more difficult time earning money when prices for their crop fell. This happened when harvests were so good that farmers produced a surplus, which meant they had more of their crop that they could sell. So there's two things going on. That was an issue with having all of your crops be wheat. It could overflood the market. Somebody had mentioned that. Maybe there'll be too much wheat. And we know when there's a big supply and there's not as enough demand, that price goes down. The other one is more of a science thing. If you're planting the same crop year after year, it uses the same nutrients from the soil. So the wheat might be taking this certain nutrient, and after a few years, the next crop of wheat doesn't have that nutrient left. So maybe you plant wheat one year on this field, and then you plant corn on it the next
We
year.
learned that last year.
And we learned it last year too. I taught that in science last year. Is that what you're going to say, Colin? Yep, the crop rotations. So if you're just planting one crop year after year, it does affect the soil. Farm families realized they would be better off if they could produce a variety of crops and livestock. This was called diversified farming. Before they could make this change, though, they would need to learn how to do this. One method was to share information with each other. So life on the farm. Every farm family had plenty of work to do. If someone needed help, family members would pitch in. Men, women, and children each had their own daily chores. At my house, we all have our own daily chores. But being on a farm, those chores are bigger chores and more important chores. Not just emptying the dishwasher, but going out and feeding the cows. Feeding the cows is super important. We don't want our cows to get sick and die. So that's big, important chores. Not that emptying the dishwasher isn't important, but it's not as big of a deal if you forget to empty the dishwasher one day. For a man, farming meant heavy work in the fields. When he was not busy plowing, planting, or harvesting, he repaired buildings and cared for the animals. With few neighbors, a man had to rely on his own skills as a logger, so cutting down the trees, veterinarian, a lawyer, a well digger, and accountant. Because you need to be the accountant because farms are a business and you need to be able to manage your money. Likewise, a farm woman did many different jobs. She tended to the children and cooked 3 meals a day over a wood-burning stove. She rubbed her hands raw doing the laundry over a rough metal washboard. Dirt was everywhere and her house cleaning was never done. She made soap, sewed and mended clothes, and preserved fruits and vegetables for winter. She cared for the chickens and cows and made butter and cheese from the cow's milk. The vegetable garden was usually her job too. At times, a woman would work in the field, especially during planting and harvesting. As soon as children were big enough, they carried firewood and brought water from the well. Weeding in the garden, gathering eggs, and bringing in cows for milking were other chores for boys and girls. When they were older, they helped in the fields or cared for younger brothers and sisters. So kids had big roles that they filled on the farm. Our last section for today, farmers and the Grange. In 1867, 7 men, including Oliver H. Kelly of Elk River, Minnesota. So if you've ever gone up Highway 10, you'll see the sign for the Oliver Kelly farm. I've been on field trips to the Kelly farm. It's pretty cool. It's set up the way it worked in the 1860s. So if you go to the Kelly farm, you can actually see what farm life was truly like. And now we're going to learn about him. They founded the first nationwide farmers association. It was called the Grange, or the Patrons of Husbandry. Both Grange and husbandry are words related to agriculture, farming. The Grange brought men and women together to share their concerns, to learn about new farming techniques, and to enjoy each other's company. Unlike most organizations of the time, the Grange admitted women and men as equal members. So they were quite progressive, ahead of their times. Grangers gathered both for social events and for lectures on farming topics. They also joined together to form cooperatives. These helped members get better prices when they sold produce and when they bought things for the farm. By 1869, Minnesota had 36 local Granges, more than any other state. 5 years later, it had 538. So the Granges were very popular, which is a good thing. It was a way for the farmers to take care of one another. At first, the Grangers stayed away from politics. They thought it might threaten the unity of their organization. Soon, however, the Grangers became politically active. Many of them banded together against what they believed was their common enemy, the railroad. This was quite a change. During the early days of settlement, most people in rural Minnesota had looked forward to the railroad's arrival. So the railroad they saw as a positive thing at first, easy transportation, easy way to move things across the land. But now the farmers are having an issue with it. So we're going to find out later in the chapter the problems that the railroad brought. Remember, there were good things and bad things. So with that, we are stopping our reading for today. For anybody listening at home, we hope you are well and hope to see you soon.